Okay.
I have to. Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Good afternoon. Today we will have webinar Pasca Sarjana Magister of Physical Education about methodology research with the topic data analysis. Don't make this mistake. With the speaker, Dr. Philip X Fuchs, PhD, from researcher in National Taiwan Normal University, Taiwan. And before we start his lecture, we have I'm sorry because the internet connection is lost. In here, I don't know. Are you hear me, Phillips?
Now I hear you again. Yes.
No. Okay. Yes.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. I'm so sorry, there is a network problem here, but I think already solved.
Okay. Now is a welcoming speech from coordinator program of Magister Physical Education, Associate Professor Dr. Satya Rahayu, MS. The time is yours.
I'm so sorry, but there is a network problem again on here. I think Mrs. Tio. Okay, Mrs. Tio already connected.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Meldi. Sorry, connected internet is a problem. Yeah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Magister of Physical Education Graduate School, Universitas Negeri Semarang. Yeah, spesial to Dr. Philip X Fuchs, PhD, from Faculty of Sport Science, National Taiwan Normal University, or NTNU. Thank you very much for your collaboration with us in guest lecture. For all my students, yeah, and all dear participants, yeah, thank you very much for joining in this guest lecture or virtual lecture. This guest lecture is implemented in cooperation and collaboration between Magister Physical Education Graduate School Universitas Negeri Semarang, and Faculty of Sport Science National Taiwan Normal University. The purpose of this guest lecture to increase student knowledge about research methodology and data analysis, and to strengthen cooperation and collaboration academic networking between UNES and NTNU Taiwan. Special for to Dr. Renat Philip X Fuchs. One more, thank you very much. In this second session, second session for guest lecture. Thank you too for Mrs. Risu Martiningsih as moderator in this guest lecture, and for all participants, have a nice lecturing, and thank you very much. Time back to moderator, Mrs. Risu Martiningsih. Okay, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yang satu dimatikan, Bu. Bu Titin pakai 2.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, we continue to the speaker. Thank you very much, Associate Professor Dr. Setia Rahayu MS, for welcoming speech, and all of participants. And we know last time Philip's already have lecturing about methodology of research, and today he also will present about data analysis. Continue about last lecture. So as you know, Philip X Fuchs have 12 documents in Scopus, and the citation is already 87, and each index is 7, so it's high than me. Even though she have height, but he is still young, and he have 2 degrees of PhD doctoral program. First in sport kinesiology and second in methodology research. So, Philip X Fuchs, the time is yours. Fuchs, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
I not hear your voice.
You don't hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay, it's good.
No, it's good. It's good.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for having me here. I may jump to it. You see my screen now, right?
Yes, I
Yes.
see your screen.
Good.
This is a fundamental of science.
Okay, good. So you remember last lecture we ended with a small homework about text writing. I was asking you to send me some of your text, 1 paragraph, and I want to go through it and to see how we can improve it even further. And I want to start with 2 of the texts you sent me, or parts of it, and then we go on with stuff on methodology and data analysis. So the first text I received was this one. I read it out, so it's easier for you to follow. In my research, I want to discuss a motoric development of elementary school children. The title of my research is Case Study of Student Motoric Development with Bedingkak, I don't know how to pronounce it, gymnastics exercises from early age, grade 1 SD. In this study, I would like to know gymnastics exercises, how powerful Bedingkak since early childhood development motor course against students, class 1 SD, because I am seeing the fact that the problem regarding cross-motor skills of early childhood are so complex, schools should maximize their role to contribute to increasing the various needs of students in the process of increasing children's gross motoric development. The reality is not as simple as what is stated in various theories. There are many reasons that make gross motoric development efforts in children less than optimal. The author chose the SD Negeri 10 Simpang Rimba school mentioned above. There are certain considerations. Okay, so let's take a look. How many sentences are there? What is their length? How are they structured? And what is the purpose of introducing these sentences to us? The first one introduces the topic and the title of the research. So we will need to ask if this is necessary, because obviously before reading this introduction, we also already have read the title, the actual title. So we know about the title. Maybe mentioning what is the title again in the text is redundant. Second sentence tells us something about the purpose of our research. And then the third one is a longer one, explaining the deficit in the literature and the need for doing this research. And the last one is already the first sentence of the methods, explaining which school was selected for the study. So as I said, the topic and the title, I think we don't need this sentence because we already have the title in the very beginning of the work, of every work, and we don't need to start a text with a sentence that adds no information but telling us the title and the topic. So we can skip the first sentence. And the third one, the deficit and the need. Usually the structure we follow in an introduction or in the first chapter of any work is that we first explain something about the theoretical background, the deficit we see, and derived from the deficit what we need to know. And then we conclude what is therefore the purpose of what we do now, what we do in the current research. So first we have a theoretical background, and then we explain what is missing, what is the deficit in this background, in the current knowledge we have, what do we need to find out, and then the purpose, why we do, what we plan to do. So I would shift the deficit and need to the place where the topic and title previously was, and then conclude the purpose, and then we start into the methods. So this is now, as you see, the third sentence becomes the first one now, because I'm seeing the fact that the problems regarding cross-motor skills of early childhood are so complex, schools should maximize their role to contribute to increasing the various needs of students in the process of increasing children's gross motoric development. So the core of this statement is that schools should maximize their role in contributing to a certain development. My first comment is about the first part of this sentence, that that question if it really is important to mention the fact that you are seeing a certain problem. It's probably not important that you see the problem, but the problem itself is important, and that the problem may be complex. This is important, not the fact that you see it. This is just a problem of language. The way it is written now, it means that you want to increase the need, the role to contribute to increasing the need. Obviously, you don't want to increase the need. You want to increase awareness or develop measures to tackle needs, to decrease needs, obviously. For the first part of the sentence, I think if the complexity of the problem or the gross motor skills is important, maybe it would be good to support this with a reference from the literature. And then it would be better to specify problems. Always, if you can specify something, it's better to be specific in what you say than being vague and just talk about problems without naming them. And my last comment, I think it's the last one, is schools should maximize their role to contribute. The question is, or the way this sentence is structured now, it suggests that because the problems are complex, schools should do something. I commented, you assume first that it is the responsibility of the school, and second, that the responsibility depends on the problem's complexity. This may be a presumption reflecting a personal view, but not a social norm. What I mean is you assume there is a problem and it must be the responsibility of the school to deal with it. I don't know to what extent this may be correct in your country or your region or the political environment going on, but this is for a neutral reader, this may be a preliminary assumption not everyone would necessarily share, and maybe it needed to be clarified first. So you see the original text on the top, and then one suggested improvement. There are many ways how to improve it, of course. I want to suggest this one. Multiple well-known difficulties, then using a reference, referring to maybe a study that investigated these problems, difficulties, and there they are more clearly specified. Difficulties in gross motor skill development during early childhood are tackled by educational institutions, referring to a second study that investigated for example, the responsibility of institutions to deal with these problems. If this is the case, then everything is very clear and very traceable for any reader. The complexity of these challenges, probably you can refer to one of the previous studies then, and this makes your statement also stronger because then it is more clear to the reader why and how it is these challenges are complex. Suggests considering various needs to support children's gross motor skill development. The second sentence, so now we come to the purpose, is the reality is not as simple as what is stated in various theories. There are many reasons that make gross motoric development efforts in children less optimal. Less than is very vague. It could be better to refer to clear numbers, or at least yeah, make it a little bit more precise and specific. There are many reasons that make gross motoric development efforts in children less than optimal. Because in practice, everything is less than optimal. In practice, you never reach an optimal state. So stating something is less than optimal doesn't tell me how it precisely is. They really state that reality is simple. So what I mean here is this sounds as if there are various theories, and they say that reality is very simple. And I'm not sure if this is really what a theory states. So maybe it was meant a little bit differently. Maybe it was meant that models are simplified, and then theoretical models suggest that reality may be understood too simple, in a too simple way. But I doubt that theories state that reality is simple. Second sentence may be a little bit unclear. There are many reasons that make gross motoric development efforts in children less than optimal. Reasons don't make, but they explain. That's the difference between reason and cause. So the cause is always the source that makes an effect. It causes the effect. The reason explains it. And then what efforts? Efforts by schools to support the development, perhaps. Make gross motoric development efforts in children less than optimal. Yeah, it is clear what are these efforts and who is doing it. Probably activities by the school, actions by the schools. And then it's unclear what is an optimal effort. For theories, again, it would be better to have references. What kind of theories do you relate to? When comparing the original one with two alternative ones, you could add a specification for the theories, and you could clarify the efforts. Common theories, then listing examples of the theories, referring to the literature, cannot reflect the reality. Maybe one short, simplified solution for this. Multiple factors make contributions to gross motor skill development in children less efficient. Again, you could clarify, you could specify the factors. And at least it's a short and clear statement that there is a negative impact. And the second alternative would be common, or could be one of many. Common theories cannot reflect the reality that the efficiency of contributions to gross motor skill development in children is limited by multiple factors. And then you can specify them. To be honest, I prefer the first one simply because of the more simple sentence structures. So if you need to choose and you cannot decide between two options of phrasing, always take the shorter one, more simple one, where it seems clearer and easier to understand for everyone. The next sentence: in this study, I would like to know, this is the purpose now. In this study, I would like to know gymnastic exercises, how powerful Bedinkak since early childhood development motor course against students. There are some English errors in this, and they should simply be corrected. But in general, it's a simple sentence, straightforward, explaining the purpose of the study, and this is good. You should not say what you want to know, because the reader doesn't really care what a single individual likes to know or not. Just say the purpose of the study, or the goal of the study, or whatsoever was, and so on. So the purpose of the study was to investigate the effect of, and then I don't know what is bedingak, but maybe it's a certain style of gymnastics, I assume. And then you could say the purpose of the study was to investigate the effect of bedingak gymnastic exercises on the motor skill development in young children. Very simple, very straightforward. Not many changes to the original one, except for removing the part "in this study," because obviously you're talking about the study if you do not refer to other studies, and removing the part "I would like to know," because it's not important what you want to know. It just matters what is the purpose of the study. And then we have the last sentence about the method. The author chose the SD Negeri 10 Simpang Rimba school mentioned above. There are certain considerations. Mentioned above is not giving any valuable or necessary information here, so we can remove it. Be consistent in the way how you refer to yourself. In the previous sentences, you used I, and now it's the author. So don't change this between the first and the third person perspective. And then you may have considered other schools, but there were reasons why to select this particular one. Yeah, it's a small thing. You may want to follow this sentence with the reasons why you selected this particular school, and you had multiple considerations that affected your decision. But I think you want to display the reasons now. And you could change the sentence to the SD Negeri 10 Simpang Rimba school was selected for the following reasons, and then list the reasons. Very simple. I would suggest this solution if the reasons itself are relatively long or you want to explain them. So you have a very short sentence ending with "for the following reasons," and then you have the reason 1, 2, 3, and you have some space for the reasons. If the reasons are somewhat short and you don't need to explain them, you could take the alternative number 2. The Rimba school was selected because of first, then you use the reason number 1, second, reason number 2, and third, reason number 3. But don't do this if the whole sentence in the end will be too long and too complicated. Okay, so the number 2 example, a different text, was the following. The playing approach is a method that is quite good to be applied in every lesson, especially physical education. This is because with this method, students can create a different atmosphere in learning, such as students are not tense, students feel happy and not bored. Besides that, during practice, the students are also not afraid if they cannot do the movements taught by the teacher, because the learning method used is the play approach, in which every material is brought and delivered to students in the form of a game. This research is a classroom action research, PTK, or classroom action research. Classroom action research is a form of reflective study by action actors, which is carried out to increase rational stability for the actions taken and to improve conditions so that learning practices can be carried out in the hope that there will be changes towards improving student learning outcomes through the first cycle and next cycle. So first step, again, checking the sentences. We see that the last one is quite long. In the first one, it's all about the playing approach, introducing the playing approach to us. And then we learn about 2 reasons supporting the first statement. This is because with this method, students can create a different atmosphere in learning. So this is giving us an explanation, a reason. And then the next one introduces the classroom action research, short PTK. And I don't see a very strong link between playing approach as a specific topic and 2 explanations or reasons for it, and then the PTK. So it seems like the classroom action research is a general method that applies to many fields, or can be applied in many fields. And this could be the beginning of a new paragraph where you talk about methodological background used in your study. So maybe this link is not very strong. Let's start with the first sentence. The playing approach is a method that is quite good to be applied in every lesson, especially physical education. Quite good is imprecise. So I would suggest to say it's good or it's not good. It's frequently used or whatsoever, but no one really knows what is quite good. And I think if you ask British people and American people, they even use it a little bit differently. Like if an American says, "Oh, something is quite good," they mean it's somewhat good. If a British person says, "Ah, that's how do you think it is? Ah, it's quite good," then it's more like not really so good. So it's very imprecise. Especially physical education. Applied in every lesson, especially physical education. Yeah, so physical education itself is not a lesson. But you mean that playing can be used in not only one lesson or session, but on a frequent basis and in many fields or educational purposes. So you can use it in everyday lectures, and you can use it especially in the field of physical education. This is probably the meaning of this. So we could change it to saying playing games is a frequently applied approach in various fields of education, especially in physical education. Or we could even remove of education, just saying approach in various fields, especially in physical education. Playing games would be more specific because playing could also be a play in the theater. So playing games, you're probably talking about sports games and stuff like this, would be more specific to say playing games. Frequently is probably better to use than just saying quite good or even good, except for the case you really mean the quality, and you can support it by some references that investigated the quality of it. And by saying frequently, you already include this intended meaning of every lesson. When you say to be applied in every lesson, probably you mean you can apply it frequently, it is often applied, and so on. Next one. This is because with this method, students can create a different atmosphere in learning, such as students are not tense, students feel happy and not bored. I think it is not required to say that this is the reason. You can just start by telling the reason. And different always means you have a comparison, and you have something that has a deviating characteristic, a different characteristic. So what is the original atmosphere? If you talk about the different one now, that is what I mean by different than what. So usually if you use the word different, the reader requires a reference. What is the original one? Do students create the atmosphere, or is it caused by the activity? The way how the sentence is written now, it suggests that the students create the atmosphere. I think this is not probably what was intended. Obviously, students are doing activities, and the way how an atmosphere is created is very complex and affected by many things, and not only the student are the responsible factor that creates an atmosphere. Such as students are not tense, students feel happy and not bored. So regarding this part of the sentence, this is not an example of the atmosphere, but describes effects of the atmosphere. So if you introduce saying such as, you introduce examples of something. But being tense or feeling happy is not an example of atmosphere. It is an effect. In good atmosphere, it can lead to being less tense or feeling more happy. Again, just a small thing about, yeah, probably it's related to English linguistic problem. So we can just reword it by, for example, saying, hereby, the atmosphere while playing games can reduce tension and boredom and increase happiness in students. This alternative sounds, for me, shorter and more simple, and in terms of language and content, it's correct. Last time I said, clear your mind and just think more simple. In this case, just say what the atmosphere is doing. The atmosphere reduces something, the tension, boredom, and it increases happiness. Less tension, less bored, more happy. That's all. These are all quite vague things again. Hard to be quantified. It would be interesting to know where this statement comes from. Is there some scientific confirmation for it or not? If so, I would suggest adding a reference here. Especially happiness, of course, is something very hard to investigate objectively. Next one. Besides that, during practice, the students are also not afraid if they cannot do the movements taught by the teacher, because the learning method used is the play approach, in which every material is brought and delivered to students in the form of a game. So first of all, this is quite long, and maybe you already realize without my comments that the reasoning is not very strong, and I will explain why. Basically, what this statement says is that in playing games, students are not afraid because the method is playing, which comes in the form of a game. This is what it basically says. And maybe now it's even more obvious to understand that this is not very strong. Students are not afraid because it's a game in games, and it comes in form of a game. So what I suggest for this one is split it into 2 sentences. So the single sentences are shorter, and make some changes. Moreover, students do not perceive the pressure to replicate a particular movement demonstrated by the teacher. So maybe you would not have had this idea to phrase it this way, or maybe you are not very familiar with some words, or you don't use them actively, like replicate or something like this. So it's totally understandable if you would word it differently. That's okay. But the main idea is, first of all, to make it shorter and to split the ideas you want to transfer to the reader, to make them more easily understandable. Students do not perceive the pressure, or they do not feel the pressure to replicate or to copy the movement that was demonstrated or shown by the teacher. And this is obviously very, very clear. If you don't have a teacher that tells you, oh, do this movement, you don't have the pressure to replicate this movement. And the second point is, instead, they experiment with a variety of movements and practice them while focusing on the goal of the game. So you have in a game, you don't have this pressure, and instead you do learning in a different way. This way, with 2 sentences, it's shorter, it's more simple, and I think the reasoning is more clear and it's more solid. And then comes the big one. This research is a classroom action research, or classroom action research. Classroom action research is a form of reflective study by action actors, which is carried out to increase rational stability for the actions taken and to improve conditions so that learning practices can be carried out in the hope that there will be changes towards improving student learning outcomes through the first cycle and next cycle. So in the first sentence, repeating twice the same, only with using capital letters, is not something we need. We can just say it's classroom action research and then introduce the shortcut. The second sentence is very long and complicated, and it has limited amount of information in it. So how about this alternative? This research is a classroom action research, and then I suggest to use a shortcut that represents the same letters, beginning letters. I just assume, maybe I'm wrong, that PTK may be the shortcut for the in the nation original word, and you kept on using this one also in the translation. Maybe this is the reason, but usually just as an advice, use the same one with use the same letters. A reflective approach assessing the actions and interactions of multiple individuals within a group, and then you can support it by a reference. Because I assume that this classroom action research is a general method that is applied in many fields or researches. So there must be some literature about it, how to use it and how it works. So one sentence to introduce this research and already give some information about it and what it is. In the original, this was done in the second sentence, which was very, very long, and then easily overfilled with information and overwhelming. So split it evenly. You see, the first sentence is very short until here, classroom research, full stop. And then the second part is very long. Split it evenly, 2.5 lines here, 2.5 lines here. So both is more easy to be understood. And then second sentence, it can contribute to the understanding of motivation for specific actions and improve the conditions to optimize learning processes. So to be honest, I'm not 100% sure if this is the intended meaning of the author, if this is in line of what classroom action research is really doing. I'm not familiar with it, so this is a suggestion. Maybe the content may be adapted. But in general, this is just a suggestion how to phrase these statements in a better structured, shorter, easier way. Okay, I want to start with today's topic about methods. As you know, the method section consists usually of participants and their descriptions, the study design, including experiments, the protocol you use. In the case of intervention studies, it describes the intervention. Then the third one, devices and instruments, and this includes everything you use. This can be forest plates, Vicon, balance board, balls, machines, everything, but also questionnaires or softwares, except for softwares you use for the statistics, because obviously these you will put into statistic section. Then the fourth one, all the calculations you run, the variables you calculate, and how you process the data. And then last, the statistics you run, including the software you use for it, the tests you conduct, and the definition of benchmarks, like what is your significance level, what is acceptance type 2 error, what is the benchmark for moderate effects, large effects, and so on. All these things. All the information in these chapters should be as precise that another researcher can replicate the whole study and can do the same. And this is just a basic structure that is often used. Sometimes for some journals or some courses, you may find different structures. It also depends a little bit of the field of your research. So maybe your professor may ask you for a slightly different structure or a different order, a different sequence of how to talk about these things. But this is the basic idea that 90% of the cases you are fine doing it this way. And I want to start by talking about data handling. So after your data collection, you run some experiments, and then you have the raw data. And then some people start doing statistics too early without checking the data quality. And you should always do this, checking your raw data. And one of the steps you do is to see if there are any outliers. You can do this in different ways. One way is to highlight your set of data with different colors and define the thresholds that are acceptable variation and things that seem to be outliers. Many times, a usual definition of an outlier is to take the mean plus minus 2 times the standard deviation. So if someone is larger than the mean plus 2 times the standard deviation, it is considered an outlier. And the same goes for a value that is the mean minus 2 times the standard deviation. The second way, next to using colors, is to visualize your data using a plot, like as you see the dots in the lower part of the slide. And this way you can very easily see single data points that obviously are not in line with all the others. In this example, the data I used here to talk about now is a study that was recently going on here in Taipei about local positioning tracking, where players have a marker at their shoulder, and they run around the court in the basketball field specifically, and the system, the LPS, measures the position, tracks the position. And the goal of this research was to evaluate the accuracy of this new LPS. It was a new system for cameras tracking the markers, and they were not sure how accurate it is. The company said it has the ability to capture the marker with a precision of plus minus 20 centimeters. So what was done in the first step was to see whether single points are more than 30 centimeters off from the real value. So this was for us considered a problematic potential outlier, independent of mean and standard deviation. And then what do you do with outliers? In general, some people say everything that is beyond the plus minus 2 times standard deviation you should remove because it's an outlier. Why should you deal with outliers in the first place? The reason is because in many statistics you need homogeneous data. If you don't have this, the statistical tests will be messed up and your results may be not reliable. Deviation in characteristics, for example, age, or derived variables across a sample, for example, females, that should be homogeneous for a desired analysis. So for the t-test, for example, it's violating very much if you have outliers. You should remove them. The reason is, I mean, there is a statistical reason, but also a logical one. You want to investigate and analyze the things you intend to. And if you have a data point, if you're in your whole sample, that is clearly something different than what you intended to measure, then you should exclude it because this is not what you were interested in. This is the basic ideas, and if you have such a case, then you should remove the outlier. Another case is if you have, for example, spikes within instantaneous data of, for example, ground reaction forces. For example, if you investigate a jump, you make jump analysis, and you have the ground reaction force, where in a counter movement jump, for example, first the force decreases, and then it increases, and then decreases again and goes to 0 at takeoff. So this is the instantaneous data of the ground reaction forces. What do you do with single spikes there? And then should you remove them? In this case, obviously not. This is a completely different case. When we talk about such spikes in instantaneous data, it's not about removing abnormal data, but instead to filter the data. And the way of how you filter the data depends on your specific data, depends on the devices you use. So you should check what kind of device you use, what kind of data it is, kinematic, kinetic, and then see in the literature what kind of filter method is the appropriate one. You can also do individualized, optimized filtering, and I will talk about it later. But usually you have recommendations in the literature, and it's a safe thing to follow these recommendations. Otherwise, if you do something different, you must have very good reasoning for it and good methods behind it to justify this when talking with your professor, when arguing with reviewers, and so on. So how is it about, in our case, of system accuracy and precision? Because I mentioned in this specific study in Taipei, they wanted to know how accurate is the system. So in such a case, obviously, when it's about accuracy and precision, we cannot remove any outliers, because the outliers may be an indicator of how accurate the system is or inaccurate. We want to know the errors by the system. First of all, because validity and reliability is an important important thing for all studies where you use any devices and so on, of course, and especially in studies where you specifically assess and investigate reliability or validity of devices. So I want to give some information about what is the difference. Precision reflects reliability, and accuracy validity, usually. And something can be precise but not accurate, and the other way around. So you see these four targets, and on the left one, you see something is accurate and precise. Precise means to hit not what you want to hit, but to hit very consistently. So it must be a small area where to hit. The second one from the left side is not accurate because you don't hit what you want to hit, but it's very precise. You hit constantly the same spot. The third one is accurate in a way. It's not very precise, so there is a random distribution, but at least it goes into the direction that was intended. And the fourth one is neither accurate because it's off the center of your target, and it's also not precise. It has a random distribution. For assessing a system's reliability and validity, we must differentiate between what were errors made by humans when doing the data collection and what was error by the system. And obviously, we want to exclude all error by the human to know what is the error by the system. This is what we are interested in. This was a data point number 23 I was very interested in. It showed an immense error of almost 2.5 meters away. So what we did was we measured the court of the basketball field. So we knew the exact position, the real position, and then we measured the position tracked by the marker at certain times, but we knew in the same time where precisely this marker was at this time. So at the position number 23, the marker was almost 2.5 meters apart from the real position. And we need to take a deeper look now to understand what type of error is this. So I highlighted here the marker. The number 23 is in this figure named LN05. The real position of it was 20 meters on the x-axis and 17.5 on the y-axis. This was the real position, but the LPS showed us it was 19.9 meters on the x-axis, so 10 centimeters off, which is okay. 10 centimeters was within the 20 centimeters that was claimed by the manufacturer. But the y-axis, it showed us 19.9 meters, which is 2.4 meters off. So the first assumption is maybe we did an error, and in the y field the X field was copy-paste, some error in using the wrong column or row. Then some assistant checked this, and he found out no, there was no error. The system told us 19.9 is the value. The next thought is it possible that maybe we placed the marker at the wrong position? Did we put it on 2020 maybe? So we did an error. So if you see this this field now, 2020 would be somewhere here. And there is nowhere in this area, there is no other marker. Like all these are markers. So in a case like this, it could be that this one was mistakenly put at this position, and then we generate wrong markers, wrong values, of course. But in this case, it was not possible that we made some errors and we just put it here, for example. So also this can be no explanation. So as I mentioned, wrong positioning, we can exclude. This was definitely not one of the errors. Selecting a wrong frame window when doing data processing could be an error, but assistant was doing the work again and found no, this did not happen. We did it in the right way. We took the right frame window for this data. The wrong reference and column, as I said, was also excluded. And then we found there was another problem, and the manufacturer didn't tell us. There was an integrated stand filter in the system. This was used to avoid the marker moving all the time, slightly moving, although in reality the person was standing still. So it was working in a way that if the velocity of the marker is below a certain threshold, it will not recognize any changes of movement. It will just say 0. But this leads to the problem that if we put the marker very slowly, the last centimeters, to the final positioning, and we approached very slowly to make it precise, at some point already before reaching the final position, the stand filter was activated and it stopped recognizing any movement. And in the end, by deactivating the stand filter, we found out, okay, now the data is much more precise. So this is the way of differentiating between errors by human and errors by system. And no matter what we do, if we do validity studies or other studies, interventions, anything, always the first step when we have the raw data is to check the quality of the raw data. Some words about how to filter or smoothen some data. So when you have the raw data, no matter if you have kinematic data or kinetic, well, for kinetic, it depends a little bit. It always depends on the data. But very often you use filters because you have natural noise errors in your data. So the way how to get rid of the data is to filter your data. And a decisive difference between filtering and smoothening is that smoothening just makes, as the name says, makes a curve of the data smooth. One way to do it is to use a moving average. What this does is taking an average of multiple data points and to move it forward and the result is the whole curve looks smoother, it looks nicer, you get rid of peaks or spikes, and in average it is somewhat better, but the derived data will still include averaged error. This is what smoothening does. It remains an averaged error. And in contrast, filtering removes a certain frequency spectrum that is associated with the error from the signal. What it does is to split your data into different frequencies. And because we know, based on other literature, that certain frequencies are noises, are not true values, and you want to get rid of these noises, you exclude certain frequencies. So this is a completely different story than smoothening. This splits the data you have, you remove specifically the error, and then you transverse the frequencies back to the data you want to have. The idea is to get rid of all error, but not affect the rest of the signal that represents the true value. This curve also looks smooth, but as I said, it's a completely different approach. And you need to know your data very well to decide the right filtering. There are some cases where for kinetic data, for ground reaction forces, you don't even use any filtering. And then for kinematics, if you use Vicon, for example, you usually use filters, and frequencies of filtering depend on what you do with data and what parts of the body you measured. So it's worth to take a look into the literature to see what kind of filter with which frequencies and order you need to use. And if you want to optimize your filtering individually for your specific data, I highlighted this, I added this reference. It's very easy to understand how to do an individually optimized filter. So once you have excluded all the errors and checked the quality of your data, only then you can start running statistical analyses. And now I refer to the example of doing validity and reliability testing. So these are specifically some tests that are common for these purposes. And the ideas we had is just doing brainstorming and seeing what we found in the literature was using descriptors, of course, ICC, the intra-class correlation coefficient, standard error of measurement, which is not the standard error of mean, coefficient of variation, root mean square error, standard error of estimate, and limits of agreement, which is known as the Blunt-Altman plot. And if you ever should do a validity or reliability test, you could use this link below, because Hopkins prepared a spreadsheet that includes some of these tests, and you just need to copy paste your data and you get the final results. It's very simple and easily and recognized, also used by other researchers. I want to talk about some of them very briefly, and then about some general things like correlation analyses and so on that you know for sure, and you will use them sooner or later for sure. The first one I want to talk about is the ICC. There are different types of ICC, and the ICC is a way of correlation between two or more items. So this is a very important difference already to normal correlation. You can run a correlation between more than two items, which you could not do with Spearman or Pearson. Usually ICC is used in questionnaires, for example. If you have multiple items representing a certain topic, and let's say you have 5 different items representing perceived happiness in life, and you want to see how consistent these are and how well they match because if they are very different, obviously they represent something different. So within a certain cluster, within the topic of happiness, for example, you want the items to agree very much with each other. But ICC can also be used when comparing different devices. If you have a gold standard and an alternative device measuring the same thing or claiming to measure the same thing, you can use ICC for comparing two or more devices with each other. It also works with a comparison of only two items. In such a case, the difference, or one of the difference between ICC and correlation is that ICC can tell you something about the agreement between two things. And this is something different than the relationship between two things. I will go into this in more detail in just 1 or 2 minutes. Second one you will find sometimes is standard error of measurement. This is not the standard error of mean, which is just standard deviation divided by the square root of your sample size. Instead, this one is the standard deviation multiplied with square root 1 minus r. And r can be any correlation coefficient. It can also be an ICC, an intra-class correlation coefficient. So it has the power to reflect agreement or relationship as you wish. You can insert ICC or Pearson for it, but it's multiplied with the standard deviation. And the value will increase the larger the standard deviation, and it will increase the smaller the agreement or the relationship. So this is an expression of the error based on the deviation and based on the consistency or agreement, relationship consistency. Okay. And there I also added a research where you can read something about the SEM and find guidelines, easy to understand, guidelines, how to use it, how it works. But the important thing is it consists, it contains an inferential statistic, the R, but it expresses an error. Next one is correlation coefficient of variation. This one is a very simple one, standard deviation divided by the mean. So you have a standard deviation between two measurements, and you have a mean between the two. This is very simple to calculate. I think it's very common. It's very frequently used. Important to know it is an expressive variation. It is reflected by a value between 0 and 1, or 0 and 100%. So it's very easy to understand also what it means. But there is one thing that people seem to forget, or they don't talk about it. And this is when is it meaningful to use this one? And as you can see, it's the standard deviation divided by the mean. So it is only meaningful as an expression of error, of variation, if referring to the mean is relevant for your assessment. If the mean is not relevant for your assessment of how important a certain magnitude of a variation is, then it's also not meaningful to use the CV. I want to give 2 examples to understand this, because I feel like people are very often not aware of this. The first example, if I have two systems and they measure a certain performance, they have a difference in measurement of 1 second. Now the question is 1 second, is this relevant? And is it relevant for your purpose to refer to a mean of the measured time, of the total time? So is this relevant, what the total time was? And if you compare a marathon competition where runners need 2 or more hours compared to a 100-meter sprint where competing athletes need 10 seconds, around 10 seconds, then obviously it matters if you have a difference between two systems of 1 second. In the one case, you have 10 seconds versus 11 seconds, and in the other one, you have 2 hours versus 2 hours, 1 second. So obviously, when using both the systems, in the marathon, you don't care. In the sprint, you would care. So the 1 second, the importance of 1 second relates to the total time. So in this case, it makes sense to use the standard deviation divided by the mean. The second example is if you have two raters and they rate a certain performance, like dancing or something. And the one rater gives 1 point and the second one gives 2 points on a 10-point scale. And for the next athlete, is a much better dancer, the rater number 1 gives 9 points and rater number 2 gives 10 points. So in both cases, you have a difference of 1 point between the two raters. And now the question is, in this case, is the importance of the 1 point, does this relate to the mean of the two raters? Obviously, it doesn't matter if it is a good athlete and he receives 9 or 10 points, or if it is a bad athlete and he receives 1 or 2 points. In both cases, 1 point difference between the raters is 1 point. And it doesn't matter if the mean between the raters is 9.5 or 1.5. But if you use the CV in such a case, the CV would be very large in the first scenario with 1 and 2 points, and it would be very small in the second, for the second athlete, with 9 and 10 points. But obviously the error is the same, and it doesn't matter for you. So I hope by showing these two examples that it's clear that for the CV you must be aware if what is the baseline, and does the baseline play a role for your assessment of how important is the magnitude of the standard deviation. The next very common one is the root mean square error. This is again an expression of error, and to say already now, the SEE, the standard estimate error, is a type of the root mean square error. Basically, how it works is you have always 2 data points from the device number 1 and device number 2, device number 1, device number 2, and so on. And you have a difference between those. For each data point, you have data from 2 devices and a difference. And now the root mean square error shows you, in average, how large are these differences. What it does is, taking this difference, take the square, plus adding this difference with the square, and this difference squared, this difference squared, and so on. The sum of all differences squared. The square, what it makes is to not allow these to compensate each other, but to be added. And then dividing it by the number of cases you have. So this is basically making the average out of all the errors. And then, because you squared it, you take the square root, and then you have the I would say you could call it the average error, the average expected error. It cannot not tell you the direction of the error. If the one is smaller, the one device achieves smaller values than the other one, or the other way around. But it tells you an average expected error, and it uses the same unit that is your desired outcome unit, meters, seconds, and so on. So it's also a very practical and very practical expression of error and easy to understand. Very commonly used, and you can check this reference. Also, this one explains how it's used and what are the strengths and what to watch out. And the last one is the Altman plot. It's also a very famous one, and it uses the limits of agreement. It is a very visual tool because it is a plot, and it shows you the difference between two devices in relation to the mean. So, for example, for this data point, when having a low mean, you have around 0 difference, no difference at a low mean between the devices. When having a high mean, right, 137 or something like this, we observe a difference between the devices of approximately -20. So what this tells you maybe already is that this Altman plot is able to show you patterns very easily, how potential errors may relate to the mean. Maybe you have large errors when you have low values, mean values, and low errors around 0 when you have large means. So this is, in this case, this is not the case. It's very evenly distributed. But this is one of the powers of Altman plot. It is a very popular one, also easy to use. But also there were some critics in the past, so I recommend reading this reference if you ever are working in the field of accuracy and precision and validity analysis, and then you can make your own decision if you want to use Altman or other measures. Again, this is the spreadsheet of Hopkins. I can only recommend it because it's very easy and fast to use it. And all these tests, they have different strengths, upsides, downsides. They express a different aspect of error or precision. And you must be familiar with what it tells you and what is the suitable situation to use it. Like, hopefully for the CV, I could clarify that it's not always useful to use it. So you must know when it is useful. And I'm not a statistician, so, and I really recommend to reading the references in the literature specifically that are available for the specific tests you consider running for your research, because it's very hard for any researcher to know all statistics. It's not possible except if you are a statistician, maybe, and even then you are specialized. So I found it much more helpful in the past. If I have a new research topic, I think about the methods I want to use, or how can I do something, and I start reading on the methods that exist for these kind of purposes, and just dig deeper and Google, read studies about it, and even use YouTube, because there are many good statisticians that make videos that are somewhat simple to understand. And if you have a very specific case, just get the information for this case. And so there is not really much point for me to pick one testing method and to talk about it in full detail now, because maybe you will never use it and your research is on something else. But it's very easy to get very good and in-depth information about almost everything. And I learned a lot about statistics. I mean, I studied it also in Italy, but I got a lot of valuable information from seriously watching YouTube videos. And I can just recommend to use all the information you can get. And the only thing I want to highlight, to take care or pay attention if you watch videos, for example, is sometimes people don't explain why they do something. And instead of just copying it and not knowing if it is the right thing, I could recommend you to watch multiple things from different uploaders, and to see how they explain the things, and what kind of reasons they give you to tickle this box and not the other one, and so on, to get an understanding. But you can learn immensely a lot from it. One thing I want to talk about in a little bit more detail, because I think it's a very, very basic thing, and every one of you probably have used it, or has used it, or will use it, is correlation analyses. And correlation is very simple, right? And you learn it in the first semester, probably in the first statistic course. And what correlation analysis does is it investigates the relationship between two things, the consistency, the linear relationship. And this is something different than agreement. Now, the thing is that, especially in validity and reliability studies, in many of these studies, researchers used correlation analyses in combination with descriptives and difference testing, like t-test or ANOVA, to assess if a device is valid or accurate. So they take a gold standard and the alternative device, and then they run correlation analysis. And if there is high correlation, they say it's well, my device correlates with the gold standard, so it must be very similar, very good, right? And this is not true. This is just not true at all. And there is a huge problem with it. Correlation and difference testing, even the combination of both, is not enough for a valid validation study. The thing is that consistency is not the same as agreement. As you see in these figures, these data points, these 3 data points, they have a 100% correlation. They are perfectly consistent, but they don't agree with each other. They are not the same, obviously. You see that the red line is just the blue line plus 1. So you have a constant error of +1. And also, moreover, I mean, this is easy to understand. Moreover, also linearity is not the same as agreement. Also, these two lines, despite being not consistent, have a perfect correlation. If you run a Pearson correlation analysis, you will get an R of 1. But obviously, if you would compare device 1, the data from device 1, the blue line, with device 2, you would never say this is it's the same, it is a valid device. Never. And adding a difference testing to the correlation analysis is also not enough. Because, as you know, the difference testing will tell you the likelihood of being wrong if you say there is a difference, but there isn't. So what is, if there is, let's say you get a p-value of 0.06. It's not significant, but it would be a huge, huge mistake to say that there is no difference. A non-significant result of a difference test does not mean that there is no difference. In fact, you would probably be wrong saying there is no difference. So adding a significant difference, even if you find a difference, you don't know how big is the difference. And to what level does this represent disagreement? You don't know. So no matter if your difference testing is significant or non-significant, you don't really know if this tells you the device agree with the other one or it doesn't. This reference here below is a very good one, I think, to understand this problem, how frequently it happens in science, how many studies are published doing these errors, and it explains easily, I think, the difference between agreement and consistency and reliability. So I can only recommend reading this one. Another big problem of correlation analysis, and also other analysis, but here it's very clear to be understood and explained, is if you have hierarchical structure in your data. It's also called clustered data. So if you have in your whole data set clusters where you have different characteristics in your sample. And usually if you have clusters, you can also have a hierarchy represented by this figure. In the lowest level of hierarchy, you have the individual observations. So this can be one subject, one person. At a higher level, you can have multiple individuals being assigned to the second level of hierarchy, maybe a certain school or a certain doctor. Let's say the low level of the hierarchy are patients. They have a problem, they go to a doctor. So you have, let's say, 200 patients. They are all in your sample, here, level 1 patients. And some of them, they go to the same doctor. So this one and this one, they go to the same doctor. And also number 3 and number 4 go to another, but to the same doctor. So a second doctor. So you have a cluster of these patients being clustered in one doctor. And then you can have even more levels, 3, 4, 5, endless levels of such hierarchical structures, because the doctor can be, Dr. 1 and Dr. 2 can be in the same hospital. And all these levels may affect characteristics in the low level of your data. Because patient 1 and patient 2 go to the same doctor, and the same doctor, maybe he has a special skill in doing surgery and not other treatments, so he will tend to do more surgeries. And the other doctor, maybe he has a different skill, so he has different outcomes. And when you do analyses and you ignore these structures in your data, and if your data is structured, it will likely mess up your statistics, and your statistical outcome can potentially be wrong, just wrong. And this is one example of getting a wrong impression by ignoring clusters. In this figure, you have on the x-axis the number of bedrooms. So the further you go to the right, the more bedrooms you have in your house. On the y-axis, you have the price of your house. So the further you go up on the y-axis, the more expensive is your house, the higher the price. If you see all the data points and you ignore the clusters, the geographical location of where the houses are, then you have this data set, and if you run a correlation analysis, you would receive this equation, this relationship with a negative correlation, probably significant. And because of having a significant negative correlation between number of bedrooms and home price, you would conclude the larger my house and the more bedrooms I have, the cheaper the house. Wow, how cool. So I just go out and I look for the biggest house with maybe 10 or 12 bedrooms, and I would pay the lowest price, right? This is because you ignore the clusters, and clusters were found relating to different locations where the house is. And if you just watch the observations within a certain cluster, for example, only within downtown, in the center, then these had a much higher price than the ones in the countryside. And if you run a correlation analysis only within this cluster, then you will find a positive correlation. If you do the same only within the cluster of houses at the edge of the town, you again will find a positive correlation. And this makes much more sense, of course. Within the cluster, the fact is, the larger the house, the more bedrooms, the higher the price. And this goes for this cluster, for this cluster, for this cluster, for this cluster. But the overall picture can be the opposite. The more bedrooms, the lower the price. So by ignoring or not being aware of clusters in your data, you could conclude completely wrong statements. What can you do with clusters? The first thing is you need to be aware of them. And the second thing is, if you have clusters, you basically have two ways to handle. The first thing is to go into the single cluster and run your analyses within the cluster. This will lead to many tests, because you need to run the tests for each cluster. But still, this is better than running the same analyses without acknowledging the cluster and just ignoring it. But be aware that in the case you run a test like 20 times or something like this, your type 1 error will increase. So be careful about this. The second way of dealing with it is the more complicated way of using multi-level analysis. I added this reference for you, but I must say that I used this once where I could not avoid it, and it requires some time to get familiar with it. And I had colleagues working with these methods before, so this was helpful. But this is not a thing when you do your master thesis or even a PhD thesis that you just, oh, okay, I do it, and I spend 1 week of time learning it, and then I do it. This is a little bit advanced, complicated way. The simple way is to set up your test design in a way that you avoid clusters in the first place, in the very first place. So when you select your sample and your research questions, and even if you have done your data collection and you find out there are clusters, then it's a good way to, instead of ignoring them, to go into the single clusters, run your tests distinctly, and that's okay. The worst thing you could do is not being aware of this cluster effect and what it does with your statistical outcomes. And this is the reason why I wanted to talk about it, because this happens many times. Just within the last 2 months now in Taipei, I heard in presentations 3 times people suggesting their methods, and they were doing exactly this error. So just by being aware of it, now you have heard of it, hopefully if you realize there may be clustering, hopefully you will remember, identify the clusters, go inside the single clusters and run your analyses within the cluster. Another difficulty in correlation and regression analysis is that usually it is linear correlation, right? If you run Spearman-Pearson, you have a linear correlation between 2 data points, data sets. And many times data or phenomena in the real world, in nature, are not linear. But when you run a Pearson without doing any transformation of data, what you try to do is basically you put a linear fit over the data that come from a natural phenomenon that may not correlate linearly, and you just try to find the best linear fit. If you see these 2 figures, you have the same data, and you can do this. Run a linear correlation analysis, and it may be significant, and it may show you somewhat moderate or good relationship. In my regard, this is not satisfying, because clearly this is this correlation, this result does not reflect reality. So instead, what you could do is find a way to transform your data that the correlation fits the curve you observe in your data. And nonlinear correlation or regression is not as difficult as people think. The first thing is, if you observe data like this, sometimes you can see clearly, there is a nonlinear relationship. If you don't see this, another way to assess it is to model the residuals, and then you have a plot. And the more equally distributed this residual plot is, the more a linear correlation is okay. If you see a pattern here, like in this example, then it would be advised to use some sort of transformation of your data. And this is quite easy because nonlinear correlation and linear correlation is basically not something very different. The idea is not to change the analysis, but to change the raw data, to transform the raw data, and then you use the same statistical steps in SPSS, for example, but you use the transformed data, not the raw data. And then afterwards, you can check the residuals. If there is no pattern, it's fine again. So here's some examples for non-linear correlation. This is called quadric. It means you add the square of a data set. So with only this part and the arrow part, you have a linear correlation. With adding this part, you have a non-linear, a quadric. This can be used if there is an exponential increase, or also if you have this kind of hill or reverse U-shape. Both are quadric correlation. And what you do is you just go into Excel to your data file and you add a second column where you square the original column. And another way is the cubic one. And it's just one additional step of using the this part of the formula in addition to the quadric one. So you see you can simulate different relationships, not only nonlinear. Also, logarithmic one is one way of transformation. This one you often find in nature when you approach a certain threshold that you cannot pass, you cannot cross it. So you will increase, but the increase itself will be slower and slower and slower. And again, also logarithmic transformation, very easy in Excel. Just adapt your raw data, add the new column, transform it, and use the transformed data in the statistical analysis. So I want you to know that it's important to understand what a statistical test does. And as I tried to point out, the Pearson correlation coefficient, for example, does not reflect agreement. It does not tell you how much result 1 is similar or the same like result 2, or data from device 1 and data from device 2. It just tells you the linear relationship between the two. Doesn't tell it is the same. So this is the reason why Pearson correlation coefficient is not a good tool to prove validity of anything. The second thing is to understand what a statistical outcome tells you. And for this, I use the example of the coefficient of variation, where you should ask the question, is it really important if the mean between two data sets is large or small? If your assessment of the magnitude of the error of the variation does not relate in any way to the mean value of the data, then the CV is completely pointless at this stage. The second example I want to talk about briefly are the arithmetic mean, the median, and the mode. Also something very basic. Everyone knows, everyone uses, and still it is important to understand what they tell you. You have seen this for sure. So the mean, the arithmetic mean, average, is the sum of all single observations divided by the number. The median is the value you find in the middle of the whole data set. And the mode is the one that is used the most frequently. Then there is also the range, which can also be interesting if you are interested in, for example, outliers. Talk about the median and the mode. The good thing of the median is you don't require normality, no normal distribution. And it is very robust against outliers, because it doesn't matter for you what is happening at the edges of your data set. The outliers are completely ignored. So if you have a data set that is very skewed, not normally distributed, and has outliers, then the mean would be quite inappropriate, and then maybe the median would be a better way to go. The mode representing the value that is most frequently observed can also be interesting for different purposes. For example, if you do some marketing and you are interested in the value that fulfills the need of the most people, you do some investigation, some research, you ask people, get some questionnaires or something, and maybe you are more interested in the mode because you want to know what was the value that was most frequently mentioned by your customers, by your potential customers. And this is much more valuable for you than having an average, because the average may be something that no one ever mentioned, not even a single time. So if you develop a product that addresses the average of some outcome of questionnaires or something, maybe not a single potential customers ever wanted what the average reflects. So in such a case, the mode may be much more valid for you to use. I want to make this clear because people often think that that the average is like the best way of representing a certain set of data, and this is simply not true. It depends on your data, and it depends on the purpose and your interest of what are you doing with this data. So different outcomes tell you a different story, give you a different perspective of the same story. By using different outcomes, you can get much more detailed information about a certain phenomenon, and it allows you to make the analysis go in much deeper areas. You can have a much more sophisticated interpretation of your data because you understand different perspectives on the data. And this will, in the end, increase the quality of your work. The goal is not to use loads of different outcomes to overwhelm or impress your professor or reviewer or reader, but to use a number of outcomes that give you a different perspective on what you are interested in. And this way, it can improve your interpretation of the data, your understanding of the data, and allow for more accurate conclusions. One thing I want to talk about is also a thing I see quite often, how to visualize results. Because sometimes in very often in conferences, so even by other researchers or by postdocs, PhD students, and so on, you can still see that figures, visualizations are not very pleasant to watch. And these are things that are very, very easy to be implemented, and they make a very big difference because you see a figure immediately. You see an article in front of you. Without reading all the text, you immediately see the figure. And if the figure gives you a good impression, it will affect what you think about the work. So it is something you see immediately. It's very simple to improve it. So I want to tell you some things of how to visualize your results. The first thing is to use big letters and also numbers. Many times figures use so small letters you cannot read it, and it's just hard and annoying to watch it. The second thing is to not use unnecessary decimals. The general rule of thumb is to not use more decimals than what the precision of your test allows you to measure, or not to use more than what is relevant for your topic. So obviously it would not be very relevant to define height of humans in centimeters and let's say 4 decimals. So there is just no point in doing this. There is also no point in providing angles when using, for example, Vicon. Angles in a degree with, or let's say angle acceleration. Angle acceleration with 2 decimals. It's completely nonsense because the device itself doesn't have the accuracy to measure this. It's always good to remove everything that is not required in text, but also in visualizations. Especially in figures, everything that is unnecessary distracts from the real information. And this is also the reason why not using grid lines. Don't use, and grid lines are the lines to give you orientation. They don't provide any information. They are just one additional element in the figure that needs to be processed instead of real information. Use black and white if possible, because not all journals and not every reader wants to print colors, or you need to pay extra. Add descriptors in your figure, for example, with the mean and standard deviation. Don't only show a column without the mean. Show the numbers in it. It would be nice to have even statistical outcomes relating to the data you show in this figure. Again, this adds information as long as it doesn't overload your figure. And then use as few shortcuts as possible, and make any shortcuts that you use, make them clearly defined, explain the benchmarks in the notes under the figure. So the figure itself, including the node, must be fully explained and understandable for everyone without reading any of the rest of the text. Yeah, so the overall message should be include as many and precise information in the figure as possible, as long as it is still clear and easy to understand, and as long as it doesn't overload the figure. Examples. The upper one is one I received to review for a journal. And here you can see the upper one is a bad example. You see 4 decimals. You see there was no node for this figure, so you have the shortcuts in the upper part, not explained. You don't know what it is. You don't know. You also don't know the shortcuts at the lower end, the MAS -3, 5, and so on. You don't know what it is. So no explanations. 4 decimals, small numbers, relatively small, and except for the columns, no additional information. Also, no description of the axis. By the way, the y-axis has no definition. And here is another example. This is from one of my studies. I chose it because I would say it's not a common column or a dot figure. So, but still, it is quite clear and easy to understand, I think. The first difference is larger letters and numbers. In fact, in the same size as for the rest of the manuscript. So this is in line with each other. A clear definition of the axis, definition of the units. You have these boxes with the mean, the standard deviation, given as precise values, including statistical outcomes. So as a whole, this gives much more information and easier to read. And you can even add, for example, confidence intervals in it as the gray boxes. So much more information, but not more overloaded. And another chapter, if you get to the stage of submitting some manuscripts, I want to give some advices here. Before you submit your manuscript to a journal or to your professor, check the available guidelines. Every journal has an author guidelines website where you can check what they require. Of course, also your university for sure has some guidelines how to write your thesis, or maybe your professor provides guidelines how he wishes. Before submitting, check that you follow the guidelines. Be sure that you fulfill all formal requirements, that you have the right structure, that you use maybe the correct terms, and so on. And don't forget any parts of your documents. Don't forget some figures, some notes, and so on. People many times do forget some things. And during the review stages, I want to motivate in a way that as long as your manuscript is not rejected, then it is only a matter of time and a matter of responses. But in the end, you will get it accepted sooner or later, most likely. So every non-rejected manuscript is on the right way. Just a matter of time. Never take comments personally. No matter if it is a reviewer or if it is your professor that comments, that gives you critique or complaints about something, see it as a help to improve your work. Sometimes comments are not always, in fact, really helpful, but don't take it personal. Just respond to the single comments and also adapt your text in the best way you find to make your text better. A comment is not even if it is phrased as a question, it is not a question. It is a suggestion to improve your text. So it's not good to just answer to a comment without adapting the text. You always should also adapt the text. And then for your own benefit, it's always good to give short responses. Don't add long explanations, because long excessive explanations seem very often like excuses. Give a very short and rational response and just refer to the part of the text where you adapted something. One of my supervisors said, they have the guns, don't give them bullets. So the reviewer or the professor who is judging the work, he has the power, he has the guns. And by giving a long response, maybe in your response, you give new possibilities to attack. These are the bullets. Don't give them the bullets. Say only what you're 100% sure about and make it very short. Every unnecessary word may be a wrong word. Yeah, but always include where in the text and how you implemented the comment. Don't so answer the comment in a way. I give an example now. This is the example. If the reviewer or your professor was asking, for example, was the data filtered, and if so, how? This is not really a question. So it would be not very wise to do no changes in the manuscript and just to answer, we did not filter the data because they were derived from device number so and so, which typically does not require filtering. First of all, you didn't change something about the manuscript. If the reviewer didn't understand that there was no requirement of filtering, then also any other reader may not understand it. So even if you have a good reason why you didn't filter, it's not enough to say it to the reviewer. You need to clarify it in the manuscript. And the second problem is the answer is too long, too much explanation. With any explanation you give, maybe in the next stage, the reviewer will ask something new, will ask again. And then you will go on, and it just takes a long time. The second answer option with changes in the manuscript could be, as per reviewer's suggestion, so you tell him, I followed your suggestion, missing information, including supportive references, were added at line 110 or something. So you just tell the reviewer, I followed your suggestion, and second, I added information and even added supportive references at this location of the manuscript. You can read it there. And then in the manuscript, of course, do it as short, as precise as possible, like always. So again, a reviewer's comment is not a question, never. It's a suggestion how to improve your manuscript. And I want to finish with some links, providing you some links you can check out. Maybe at one stage in your research career, it may be helpful. I will again give you the slides of this presentation, so you don't need to remember any of these links. You can just check them if at any stage of your work or future career, if you have one in this field, maybe also in other fields, you may just look them at this time. For me, the important thing of last lecture and also of today's lecture was not too much to give you precise information that you can work with right now or tomorrow, but to talk about things that make you aware of certain problems or challenges, to provide you some sources where you can find answers in the case you should find yourself in such a situation in the future, because situations are very diverse, and maybe you will never use validity testing, or you may never want to use blunt Altman plot and so on, but maybe you use correlation, or maybe you have a relationship that is not linear, and so on. So I hope that it was possible to give some inspiration to think about some things, and maybe especially the case of correlation. I think it's one of the cases that most frequently happen to occur. I think that's it. Yes. Yes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Philip. It's very excellent presentation and very understandable, very easy to understand and very clear. And this you have a question from Dr. Hardian that you already answered. Okay, Dr. Hardian.
Thank you, Dr. Titin. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fuchs. Thank you for the very good presentation. So it's very easy to be understand. So my first question is, what is the judgment to choose the method for transformation? Because when we read statistical book, they said that we have to see the power and plot in the from the graph. So how we can choose the right type for transformation method, such as cubic or square, or. And my second question is, when we deal with the not normal distributed data and we have to do regression analysis, I read in one journal that we can just do directly the analysis without transformation, and we check the residual is normal or not. Can you explain that, Mr. Fuchs? Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Fuchs. I'm sorry. Yeah, if my question is not so good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yeah. So about the transformations, the first thing you could do if you have experience, you will see when doing the residual analysis, depending on how they look, how the distribution is in the residual analysis, in the residual plot, you can tell what kind of transformation is most likely helpful or not. But it's not even a problem if you don't see it based on the residual plot, because it's no problem of just running randomly a number of transformations. I mean, there are not so many that are common. You can just run 4 or 5 different transformations and run the analysis, and to see which of these fits the best the real data. For example, for a correlation analysis, you can just run quadratic, cubic, log transformation, all of them, run the correlation analysis, and you can stick to the one where you get the best correlation. This one is obviously then the one that is best fitting for your data. So this is what I suggest.
Okay. So how about the not normal distributed data, and we have to do regression analysis? Can we just do the analysis without transformation? And because I read one journal, they said it's okay, you can do analysis with for not normal distributed data. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I read about it, and the opinions of statisticians are controversial. So some say for some regression analysis, it's not so. It doesn't have a huge negative effect if you violate the assumption of normality, and some say it is a must-have. To be honest, I don't. I'm not too good of an statistical expert to have my own definite opinion about it. I think if the normality is not too violated too strongly, like when you assess the skewness in kurtosis, and let's say if you find normality in 4 out of 5 variables in your regression analysis, and the 5th one is skewness or kurtosis is somewhat off, but it's not horrible. I feel like it's not a big problem to violate this assumption. But I know that some statisticians say it's no problem and some say it is a problem. My feeling is that within the recent years, more and more statisticians say it's not really a big problem, but it depends on the test, of course, and has many factors. And in this case, I would go with the requirements of the journal. If the journal says that's okay, then yeah, okay.
Okay. Yes. Now I'm waiting the comment from reviewer because I just submit the article and then I'm waiting the comment. I use that article that it's not necessary to do transformation before regression analysis. Can I have more questions, Dr. Titin?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So it's related to transformation. After we analyze the data and we got the number after analysis, do we have to recalculate back and use the number after recalculate, or we just use the original from the before transformation?
Can you say it again?
Yes. After we analyze the data after transformation and we analyze the data, so after that, do we have to retransformation, calculate back, and we have to use the original data or the data that after we analyze? Thank you. Yeah.
It depends on what do you want to display and how do you want to do it.
Yeah.
Because of course, if you run, for example, a correlation or regression analysis, then afterwards you just show the beta, for example, or inferential outcomes. So it's not related to your data anymore.
Yeah. For example, we do comparison analysis. We have to show the mean and SG, for example. Do we have to use the original data before transformation or the data and we retransfer back and we present it?
For showing the mean and so on, to describe the data, you use the raw data.
Oh, the raw data, the original data.
The original one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
For the interpretation of the tests you did, of the correlation, for example, of course it gets very difficult sometimes to interpret the transformed data. So you need to consider the transformation in the interpretation, but when providing the mean and standard deviation and so on, you do for the original data.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Fuchs. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Titin. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hardian, for the question. And then we have another question from National Taiwan Normal University. Yunia, you can ask him directly.
Titin. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for Dr. Phillips. I have a question. I have a problem with my research. That I have a small samples for my research, and then when I run my data, the data was not normal distribution. But when I discussed with my friends, that they thought, is it okay to run parametric for your research? Because you have a small samples, and then I think that's quite same with the Dr. or Mr. Hardian question that's about the normal distribution. So when I want to run my data with non-parametric with my small samples, and then my friend thought that you can still use the parametric analysis because that's not big deal for your research. But if you have a big sample, so you have to consider about your method for the analysis. So what do you think about this, Dr. Phillips? So is it correct to use still use parametric for my small sample for my research? Thank you.
May I ask what is your specific sample size?
It's all about the obesity students. So for the obesity students, they don't have a lot of obesity in the elementary school. So that's my a little bit problem. So when I would try to normal analysis, my data was not normal. So I tried to run my data with non-parametric actually. But when I and discuss with my friend, no, it's not big deal. So you can still use the parametric for your research. Is that correct or what? So this is also a big question for me. Is it correct or not? So I still learn from the statistic book to answer this question.
Yeah. The more traditional way would be to use the non-parametric test. But again, also in this, opinions are controversial, and some people say there is no real difference. So you can also use the parametric tests, which are a little bit stronger. At some point, if it is too small, I mean a very, very small sample size, then non-parametric again make no sense, because what non-parametrics are doing is making order. They compare the order, not the means. And so if you have, for example, only 5 subjects, and the order will always be the same because the differences are too large, then it doesn't make sense to take a non-parametric. But usually I would say you can always run both and see if there is a difference between them. If there is no difference between the non-parametric outcome and the parametric outcome, then it doesn't even matter really much. So for you, I would try both, and as long as it is not extremely low, I would tend to prefer taking the non-parametric test.
Actually, I try both, and then when I see the result, the difference just a small thing, so not significant difference. So that's why I try to choose a parametric and non-parametric for my research, my analysis. So that's why I need your suggestion.
Okay, yeah. Especially if there is no significant difference between both tests, I would go with the non-parametric, because it's much easier to justify, to reason why you did take the non-parametric. So you just need to say you did normality distribution testing because of lacking a normal distribution and the small sample size. You chose non-parametric tests. And no reviewer will tell you, oh no, you should take parametric test. But the other way around, if you take the parametric test, then you may be forced to have good reasons for it.
Okay. Thank you for your suggestions. I will try this.
So I think both may be okay, but with the one, you may have troubles in being forced to reason and justify. So non-parametric is is easier for you?
Yeah, of course. The first time I tried to non-parametric, but when we discussed with my friend that no, you can still choose the parametric and then some reason and then different significance something. So that's why I still decided. So it's really good. I found this webinar, so I can ask with you directly. Thank you.
And by the way, this goes to both questions from you and the previous one. Normal distribution is not one of the biggest assumptions, not one of the most important assumptions. So violating the assumption of normality usually doesn't have a big impact of the test outcome. There are other assumptions, and for example, clustering is something that is way more important. Normality distribution is usually not that important.
How about the homogeneity?
Sorry?
Homogeneity. Yes.
Yeah. Also one of these assumptions. I don't know if it is more or less important than normal distribution, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Eta. It's a very good question, and thank you, Philip. Actually, in Indonesia, usually we use, when we run statistics, we have like a requirement for normality and homogeneity. So if normal, we can use parametric. If not normal, we use non-parametric. It's same with homogeneity. And what did you say is not necessary, right? So what must we do before run the statistic? And then I have experience when I submit journal. So I do like just correlation, but in the journal said you need to use to divide it between men and women. But this is young, because young people for physiology is under 10 is same. For young, for children is still same, but in the reviewer said need to divide it. And then I used to weigh ANOVA, but after that he say not to ANOVA, but ANCOVA or something. So I'm not familiar about that. What do you think about that? So in the statistic, it is okay when sometimes we found that it's same, all women and men just run in the same statistic, not divided. Or do you have something opinion about that?
As I can imagine in this situation, maybe you were investigating on something, and in your sample size you had females and males, and then you run an ANOVA for the whole sample size.
Just the test, because pre and post.
Yeah. So, but for the whole sample size, for all females and males. Yeah. So you can do the same with ANOVA, right? If you have more than 2 factors, then you would use ANOVA. But even if you have only 2, you can use t-test, or ANOVA gives you the same result. And what you can do with the ANOVA, in addition to the t-test, is what was mentioned, the UNCOVA, adding a covariance. And I can assume that the reviewers maybe wanted to run an UNCOVA using the same approach with the ANOVA, but adding gender as a covariant. And what this does is running the similar analyses, like the simple ANOVA, but considering the effect on the dependent variable of a an additional covariate, this would be gender. Because maybe the difference you found in your ANOVA can be affected by the gender. Maybe the dependent variable is different for males than for females. And so if you run the same analysis with considering gender as one contributing factor, so you add it in your ANOVA as a covariate, and then it becomes an UNCOVA, maybe the result will be different. And then maybe it shows you, considering for the gender, then there is no difference in, I don't know, jump height anymore, or sprinting time, or whatsoever. So maybe this was the thinking behind the reviewer's comments in this case.
Okay, I see. But after that, rejected. After that, rejected, it's no problem. It's last 2 years ago.
So first they said major revision, and then they said rejected?
Yes.
Okay. Then what did you answer? I mean, what was your answer on the UNCOVA and so on?
Yeah, I do that UNCOVA and then said with the covariance the gender, and then it said not appropriate with this journal, just say like that. And my professor stopped, just say like that. And then okay, no problem. So we going to another journal.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Philip. Maybe any else question? This is Dr. Nisa. You want to have a question? This is
I think I have no question for this lecture. I'm one of your students for this lecture. Thank you, Mr. Philip. Your presentation is so good, and maybe I learned a lot for this about just like regression analytic model that many students use it for the analytic, and I could see the explanation in your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the student, please. Any question? I don't know, they're so shy. They understand or so shy, or maybe they sleep. Mr. Faisal, you have question?
No, overall, it's very good session, and I'm very happy. Dr. Phillips explained really very well that how data can be rationally used and how we can analyze the data and we can get the better information. And we know very well that data is the main thing. And if we intelligently use our data, then we can get primary, secondary, and more. We can develop the more knowledge management system and expert system as well. So rationality is this, that whatever and in which way you basically find out the exact rational optimal solution and answer of your question through by analyzing by data. So this is the most important thing. So we should adopt all the procedure to get the better and optimal solution of our research and whatever our thing. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy and I'm very glad, Dr. Phillips. Thank you very much. Wonderful session.
Thank you too. Thank you too. Thank you very much.
Mr. Faisal. Mr. Faisal from Pakistan. Okay, so any other question?
Can I have
yes, please.
more questions? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Oh, the cat is very good. Very cute.
Yeah. I'm sorry. My son sent message. Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Dr. Titin. Yeah. Yes. My question is it's related to previous question that I did how do I say pseudo cohort study. I using a several cross-sectional for age, and I treat it as longitudinal data. So for that kind of data, can we use can we, if I want to know the trajectory, for example, one scale to with the across the age, so can we still use the linear regression analysis? Thank you, Dr. Fuchs. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this is a big question now. Without knowing the data and more importantly the purpose of the study, it's hard to answer. But for example, I could imagine one possibility of using regression models for this purpose, for longitudinal studies. For example, by predicting outcomes that you observe in the present based on indicators that you observed in the beginning of the longitudinal study.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah.
For example, you run an regression, and
Yes.
your dependent variable is your desired outcome.
Yes.
You want to know, and you measure it today in the present,
Yeah.
And since it is a longitudinal study, you have development of other variables in the last, let's say, 10 years. And for the regression, you put variables as indicators in the regression model that are from the past, from the beginning of your longitudinal study, from 10 years ago, from 8 years ago, and so on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
with such a regression model, you could predict the outcome of today based on the data of yesterday. Yeah. This could be one case.
So the data is not really not real longitudinal, because we collect some a group of people with several age group, for example, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, and 8 years, and so on until adult. So it's not a related person for the age group. So can we still use the regression analysis for such kind of data?
So you mean it's not really longitudinal, but you investigate 8 years people, 9 years people, 10
yes,
years.
of course. And when we treat it as like so we tell it as a pseudo cohort, yeah, or multiple cross-sectional study. Yeah. Yeah. So can we still use the regression analysis for such kind of data?
I think it's not a very clean approach, because you don't know if the people that are today 8 years, if they have the same phenomenons that you observe today in the 13 years old people.
Yeah. So this is the group of person with polymorphism. So it's mean the abnormality will go with them for all their life. Yeah. So we just want to know the development of the scale that we study across the age, because it's very difficult to follow them year by year until maybe from the children until adults. Yeah. So like it's more impossible to do a long time of longitudinal study.
Yeah.
So it's still, what do you think? It's still appropriate to use that approach for analyzing the data?
I mean, I can understand that it's in some scenarios it's not very practical to do a real longitudinal, but it doesn't change anything about what the, let's say, fake longitudinal can provide. Yeah. Maybe a better solution could be to make to split the time frames, to have a real longitudinal study, but only over a very short period of time, like let's say 6 months, and to compare the change within 6 months in young people, in a little bit older people, little bit older people, little bit older people, and so on. So in total, you can tell something about the longitudinal change, but you require only 6 months, and then you compare, for example, 8 years and 8.5 years people. Change between 8.5 people, years old people with 9 years old people, and so on, and so on. So this way, it would be a real longitudinal study, and maybe this is a more cleaner way to predict development over time.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah. thank you. Yeah, I read from Kramer book. I forget the title about the clinical epidemiology and biostatistics. Maybe I forget the title, but they said that we can use pseudo cohort design for something like such kind of study. Yeah. So, but I try use that approach. Then I try to use linear regression, but it seemed not so good, not as we expect the result. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Fuchs. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Titin. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Hadian. So it's very good question and very informative answer. Okay, so any else question? Please, student, participant, you can on the video. After this, we take picture together before we finish. Dr. Stella Hayu. And here have Dr. Said Junaidi. He's the lecturer in sports science department. Also have Dr. Siti Baitul. Also Dr. Raya, Fatona Soraya. So please open the camera. Actually, in here have so many questions. And they're asking, what's about the normality if we have like just a few sample? Can we run statistic just only 3 or 1, or do we need more than 10, more than 30 to get normality?
Okay, yeah. So if the sample size is very, very low, like did you say 3?
Yeah.
Okay, no. Okay, so for 3 there is no point in running inferential statistics. Then just do descriptive statistics, no inferential ones. But if you have other sample size that is considered low but possible to run inferential statistics, like
10,
let's say 8, 10, then sometimes it can happen that in your data you don't have normality in all variables, but in reality it would be normal distributed. And the reason is not because of a really lacking normal distribution, but because of the small sample size. Because the smaller the sample size, the harder it is to confirm statistically normal distribution. So especially if you have a very small sample size, or let's say 10, for example, and you have 1 or 2 variables, let's say up to 20% of the variables that are not statistically confirming the normal distribution, I think it's not a big deal, no problem.
Okay.
And
so
the larger the sample size, the more of your variables should fulfill the requirement of normal distribution. Because if it is if it is a small sample size, maybe the reason is only because of lacking power of the statistical test of normal distribution. So it's not a big problem if you miss it.
See, so if not normal distributions, no problem.
In a small one, especially. And
a small one.
And of course, you always have in a test, you always have more than one variable. So if you run a test for 10 variables and one is not normally distributed, then of course it's no problem. If 5 of them are not normal distributed, then it is a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. And then wait a minute. The question, so this is from.
But then again, I should add again maybe one other aspect. If the sample size is so small, then it may be a good reason to take a non-parametric test just because of the small sample size, not even because of the normal distribution.
So if just small, we can do non-parametric.
Yes.
Oh, that's good solution. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. And then, wait a minute. This have so many questions, but I need to looking for the next question. So a linear regression technique appropriate for analysis when the dependent outcome variable is not normal distribution. It's not normal distribution.
If the dependent variable in regression is not normally distributed, what then? What is the question then?
So a linear regression technique is appropriate for analysis when the dependent outcome is not normal distribution. The distribution is not normal. Is it okay to use linear regression, or do we?
So in general, it is not ideal because the regression is basically like a correlation, and it should be normally distributed. To be honest, I'm not sure if it has a different effect if the dependent variable is not normally distributed compared to independent variables. I don't know. So I cannot tell you if it is a difference if in both cases 1 out of 10 is not normal distributed, but the 1 is the dependent variable, or if the 1 is the independent variable. I'm not sure.
So if not normal, just if you want to save, just use non-parametric like that.
If it depends on the sample size and the number of variables that are not normal distributed. So usually I worked often with sample sizes between 10 and 25, let's say something like this. And if you have more like 10, 12, or even 14 participants, then it may happen quite easily that 10% of your variables are not normally distributed, and I consider it as not a big problem then, because first of all, it is a small portion, and second, it may be due to the small sample size. And then in such a case with 10 participants and 10% not normally distributed according to the statistical test, I would still go for a parametric test. If it is more than this, I would consider a non-parametric test. So in most cases, you can still go for a regression, even if the dependent variable is not normally distributed, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Philip. Okay, any else question? If not, so please open your camera, and then Mr. Melody will help to taking picture. Please open your camera. Okay. Before we taking camera, Dr. Setia Rahayu will give you certificate.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Titin. Wait a moment, I will share a certificate.
Please open our camera. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Retnat Philip X Fuchs, PhD. For you lecturing is very clear, great, and very well information. We hope with good data analysis, student and all participants can write better their research report for publication. I would like certificates for you. Thank you very much. And see you next time.
Thank you too. Thank you very much for all participants' time to listen to and for the good questions and conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip, for your time to give some excellent lecture for us. And now we're taking picture together. Please open your camera. This is so many. Miss Nisa, Mr. Ilhasa, Pramodia, Mr. Marcono. Oh, thank you, Mr. Marcono. This is from University Jakarta, State University Jakarta, UNJ. Okay, please take a picture. Are you ready, Mr. Meldy? Sanchez. Okay, one more. This is first slide. And then second slide. That's good. Yeah, take it. Good. Sanchez. Oh, second slide. What happened? Why you not open the video? Okay, third, please. Okay, already all? Oh, very fast. Mr. Meldy is helping us for Zoom. And then thank you also for Mr. Fatri from National Heart Nursing Science, Taiwan, who helping for certificate. And then thank you all participants. That's for your cooperation and for your attendance in this lecture. In here also have a Dias Fajar Permana, who's young lecturer in our department.
Hello, Miss.
Yeah. And Miss Raya, Miss Raya, Fatona Soraya also in here. Where is he? Okay, thank you. So thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Okay, thank you very much for your excellent presentation and very informative lecture. So I hope we not only today, so we can have next time to continue this program, or maybe we can have like a collaboration research and you can also help us for, this is correct or not? So not just done in here, but we need to continue. Okay, is it okay?
Mm-hmm. Sounds great. Sounds great.
Yeah, maybe next time you can go to Semarang City.
Yes, that would be great to visit you.
But after pandemic. Yeah. Okay. So I think the time is already going to 2 minutes to 4. So if anyone to say something to Mr. Phillips, you can say.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phillips. Yeah.
Yeah,
and
thank you. Yeah.
And I hope we can see you directly in Semarang, or maybe I can go to your place. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, very nice lecture. Yeah.
Thank you.